Now, what started out was broadly labeled the DA's Moonshot Pact heads to the May 29th election as the Multi-Party Charter 2024. Dubbed a landmark coalition agreement that should shake things up in this election. Professor William Gumede, who's an independent chairman of the negotiations for the Multi-Charter Party, and Susan Booysen, who's a political analyst, join us this afternoon to unpack the ins and outs of the charter. Good afternoon to you both. Thank you so much for joining us. Okay. Maybe we'll start, Prof, we'll start with you, the idea of the multi-party charter. The multi-party charter is a bit of a tricky one. We'll call it the MPC, I think, for everybody to make it simpler. Is this a model we've seen work in other places in the world? Is this, as new of a model as it sounds for South Africa?
Thank you for having me. I think this is a very, very exciting initiative. I mean, this is the first time in South Africa's modern history that there is a pre-electoral coalition, so a coalition ahead of the elections. Now, normally in South Africa, what we've seen at a local level has been coalitions after an election. Say, like, if there's no one party to get the biggest vote, parties come together and so on. Now, when you do it that way, that is where there's often inherent instability because the parties come together after the election. They don't agree on policies, there's distrust and so on, and then they try to put a sort of a gunshot coalition together, and that is why we see many of the problems that we're seeing now at a local level. Now, around the world, there's been many countries where pre-electoral coalitions have worked very, very successfully. Now, it worked in a couple of ways. Often when there is a very strong incumbent party, say a liberation movement or even a dictatorship or military rule, when no single one party can unseat a dominant force in power. Like, for example, in Brazil, since the 1950s onwards, they always have had big coalitions to get the military out. Because one party, one individual on his or her own cannot take out an entrenched strong party. We've seen it in the Gambia recently when, the dictator there, Yame, he was very, very strong, he was entrenched, and then the oppositions put together a pre-electoral coalition, and that worked. Even in Mauritius, which has been the most successful coalition-governed country in Africa since 1945, the coalition started off by taking on the opposition parties, taking on the independence movements, which they could not take out on their own as individual parties or individual leaders.
Thank you for that, Prof. Susan, I'd like to bring you in here, maybe, assessing the mission to unseat the ANC. Of course, it is proving to be a mission, hence we do see, the MPC being formed here, and even questions around the strengths of opposition parties as we head closer to the 29th of May. I'm just keen to get your overall thoughts here about, the formation of the MPC and its prospects.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you to William for outlining so much of what is relevant in this context. And first about the MPC, I believe it is really an honest way to proceed into a situation where no single party is likely to get an outright majority come the May 29 elections. And I believe it's honest, it shows the integrity of the parties involved because they make it clear beforehand that these are the parties that they will be forming alliances with. And that has implications for policy and governance. And so that is very commendable. But then we hit this brick wall of South African party politics and how majorities are to be constructed. And whatever way currently in this period of uncertainty running up to elections, we're very much guided by what is available in terms of opinion polls. And however we juggle those figures and add things up, currently the MPC doesn't yet come to an outright majority. And the ANC, we know, is not entirely collapsing. It will, in all probability, remain by far the biggest party, but also will be falling far short of that outright majority itself. When current polls indicate 40, 41, 42% for the ANC. And in that space, and that's another harsh reality of South African politics, in that place, the MK party seems to be usurping a lot of the available votes. The flexibility, the realignment appears to be largely in this Liberation Party bloc, ANC, EFF, now the MK party. That is where we see the greatest fluidity at this stage. So for a formation like the MPC to really make progress, they would have to break that barrier. And it's not quite clear yet how they, with their leadership, with their policy positions, with their identity, realities at this stage, will be breaking that barrier to be able to construct an outright majority. And of course, it forecasts havoc for the post-election period, where neither the ANC bloc nor the DA bloc is likely to have a majority. And then the ANC will be pushed into the situation of really nailing its ideological colors to the mast and policy positions to the mast, if it may be forced to choose between EFF, between MK, or between the DA and the MPC bloc. So fascinating and very unstable, volatile times ahead in South African party politics.
Prof, I want to bring you back here. I think Susan made an issue, a comment about breaking barriers. And I think one that I'm keen to get your thoughts on with the MPC is the issue of it being a DA baby, which I think is something that it has to possibly, a barrier that it has to overcome. How do you think that can be done for it not to be seen as something that the DA created for itself, specifically because those who are then, against the DA may see it as a pseudo DK move?
Yes. I think the DA came up with a concept, so we have to credit them. So it's important. We need initiators. So things, in politics, as in life or in business, you need an initiator to begin the process. And I think credit for them to do that. I engaged with them prior to that. I was called in by the DA before the Moon Pack idea, or what is now the multi-charter idea, to talk them through the possibilities. How would a coalition politics look like? What is happening around the world? What can we learn from around the world? What is the case to make a case for a pre-electoral coalition? So they did canvas also outside. So I think that's a key thing. I think what is much more important now is, because it is the biggest opposition party in the group, that it doesn't dominate, that it allows the partners equal say, and so on, or equitable say, and that's going to be very important. But I think the most important thing, South Africa is in a really deep crisis. It's been now 30 years of post-apartheid government. We need a realignment of our politics. And we need a realignment of also our political parties, because we're in a logjam. And one way we can either wait for a realignment to happen naturally, that may never happen, or we could begin to intervene to try. And I think realigning the opposition parties into a multi-party charter is one of those realignment. Of course, also part of the realignment is new parties forming or parties breaking from the ANC. It's all part of the realignment of South Africa's politics. But I think it is prudent to actually have a interventionist approach of saying, how do you realign so we move away from the apartheid era type of politics, because that's what governs us. The ANC's was a liberation movement, is still behaving in that way in the new new era. The opposition parties, some of them were, operated in the apartheid system and so on. So they bring that culture with, but we can't have both of these two different cultures are not appropriate for our country. So we have to realign the politics. So either we can do it by natural, slow attrition, or we can step in and try to change this. And I think the MPC is one of those attempts, and to change to almost to accelerate the realignment.
Gotcha, Prof. Susan, in South Africa, there isn't much disagreement about what our problems are and what needs to happen for us to solve them. We know we've got a growth problem, an economic issue problem. We know we've got a crime and corruption issue. Plenty of the issues well documented. But one thing that we've always disagreed on is how to fix them. And I'm keen to get your thoughts on that issue of ideologies and how they might even work within the MPC here, where compromises have to be made, trade-offs have to be made, but a conducive environment needs to be made for how we solve our problems.
Yeah, when we look at political opinion polls, and even most recent ones like we saw yesterday from Mark Data that ENCA released, there is so much division in South Africa. Ideologically, we go in both directions, and very often it's a question of like a 47% to 53% division on big issues like radical economic transformation versus bigger involvement for business, bigger or smaller roles for business or government in running the state, in government, in running state-owned enterprises, for example. On all of these issues, South Africans can really go in either direction. So it is, and much of the cynicism lies in government, the focus on government, perceptions of government abilities, and the reasons why South Africa is in this policy quagmire and governance quagmire. So there's a lot of division, and really South Africans can go either way. So the political parties follow in the aftermath of the election will really have their work cut out for them to try to fathom new directions, hopefully even get together to fathom new directions. Because either way, if choices are made this way or that way, more left and more right, or more of a combination of the different systems, there is going to be discontent and further disconnection and disappointment with alienation from South African politics. So I really believe now more than ever there is such a huge need for political parties across the spectrum to come back. Maybe a government of national unity is far-fetched to imagine, but at least on policy and governance issues to forge a consensual way ahead, recognizing that one side is going to carry an outright majority on any other big issues.
Well, unfortunately, we are out of time, and I'm keen to keep having very similar conversations as we lead up to the 29th of May. I'd like to thank you both for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure. And that was Prof. William Gumede. He's independent chairperson of the negotiations for the multi-party party, as well as Prof. Susan Booysen, who's analyst and visiting professor at the Wits School of Governance.